Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining the National Association of Secretaries of State, or NASS for short, Elections 101 press brief. My name is Maria Benson, and I'm the Senior Director of Communications for NASS. So I'll be moderating today's brief in conjunction with Secretary Simon. So let me go ahead and go to our ground rules slide for you guys. We have an informative brief planned for you today. I will first run through these rules, run of show, and then most importantly, an introduction of our presenting NASS members. Let me start by saying this brief is on the record and is being recorded. The recording will be put on our NASS website, nass.org, about 48 hours or so after this brief concludes. During the session, reporters, please keep your audio muted and your cameras off to help us ensure a smooth recording. So for the agenda, after introductions, we will have a brief state-by-state overview, followed by reporter Q&A via the chat function. This will only be via the chat function. So reporters, if you have a question, if you hear a secretary say something, throughout, feel free to go ahead and input it into the chat, and I will do my very best to get to all of the questions, time permitting. So during the Q&A portion, I will read the questions out loud to the members, and they will go about answering them. If you have a question for a specific secretary, for instance, Secretary Simon as NASS president, please include that within your question. So now that we've gotten the logistics out of the way, I'd like to get to the fun part and the purpose of this brief and our presenters. So our presenting chief election officials today are as follows. We have Steve Simon, who is our current president of NASS and the Minnesota Secretary of State. He became our president in July, and he will serve until summer of 2025. Next, we have NASS President Michael Watson, Mississippi Secretary of State, who's running a little bit behind. I'm not sure if he's joined yet, but whenever we'll get to him, we'll get to him. Then we have NASS Elections Committee co-chairs, Gregg Amore, Rhode Island Secretary of State, and then also Michael Adams, Kentucky Secretary of State. And then we have NASS Western Region VP, Maggie Toulouse Oliver, New Mexico Secretary of State. And then we also have, last but not least, Utah's Lieutenant Governor, Deidre Henderson. I really want to thank you all so much for participating, and I want to ensure everyone kind of has their moment in the sun, so I will go ahead and turn the floor over to Secretary Simon.
Thanks a lot, Maria. Thanks for that welcome. I'm Steve Simon. I'm Minnesota Secretary of State, and I'm the current president of the National Association of Secretaries of State. I want to thank NASS for hosting this and for members of the media for attending today's Elections 101 briefing. I want to thank my colleagues for joining. As Maria mentioned, we have, or shortly will have, Secretary Watson and Secretaries Amore, Adams, Toulouse Oliver, and Lieutenant Governor Henderson. Each of us has a unique perspective that not only enriches our states, but also our entire association. I'm really proud to work alongside them. They're outstanding colleagues. So let's start by talking about the basics of elections. The nearly 40 members of NASS serve as their state's chief election officials. In this capacity, we routinely plan for all aspects of administering and securing elections. We also prepare for the unexpected, including natural disasters and cybersecurity incidents. Further, elections in the United States, as we all know, are decentralized. That's by design. There are as many independent laboratories as there are states and jurisdictions in this country. So they're carried out at the state and local level. That allows us to determine the best methods of voting that fit the needs of our respective citizens. So many of you are wondering, how have we prepared for the general election in November? And it won't surprise you to know that there is no one-size-fits-all approach. Let me start and sort of break it down by area, though, because there are multiple dimensions of the work that we do and the preparedness that we all engage in. So I want to talk by addressing election cybersecurity broadly. So all states consider their election infrastructure and IT systems a potential target for threats, and we know this has been the case in the fairly recent past. And because of this, chief elections officials throughout the United States have worked really tirelessly and consistently to mitigate risks to our election systems and processes. We've worked closely with local election officials, federal agencies like the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, also known as CISA, private sector technology providers, and others to improve cyber threat information sharing and the overall security posture of our election infrastructure. Now, individual secretaries of state and their election security teams have implemented extensive security controls and built strong in-state partnerships. And I'd say cybersecurity remains a top priority even as we focus on an increasingly complex threat landscape. On physical security, which is an outgrowth of and very much related to cybersecurity. On pure physical security, election officials continue to improve safeguards for election facilities, infrastructure, and personnel. States have worked with law enforcement, with CISA, and with others to complete physical security risk assessments and implement recommended security controls and practices for keeping employees, poll workers, and voters safe. It's a huge priority. Now, on the issue of harassment or threats directed at elections administrators or the poll workers on election day, unfortunately, election officials have increasingly become targets for threats of harassment and physical violence. NASS has consistently condemned those threats, and no one should ever have to fear for their safety just because they're voting or because they are involved in administration of elections. NASS and our members believe that our democracy is strongest when we come together, and we encourage all Americans to uplift and support the election officials in their local communities. Now more than ever, secretaries of state are sharing information with each other and encouraging voters to get information from trusted sources. I can't emphasize that enough over the next 15 days, to get information from trusted sources. Also, as you may have heard, NASS and its members have worked together to promote the Trusted Info 2024 campaign. That's hashtag Trusted Info 2024, which urges voters to get their specific voting information from their state and local election officials to ensure that they're receiving timely and accurate election updates. We also have our voter information site, which is canivote.org. Canivote.org. Citizens can use this site to find the correct place to register to vote, to check their voter registration status, to find their polling place, to find out what type or if ID is needed at the point of voting, to find out about early and absentee voting, and to sign up to become a poll worker. So citizens can go to canivote.org and they will be directed to the place where they live, whatever state they live. And it's either the Secretary of State site or some other website that is a reliable partner with reliable, accurate information. So again, that's canivote.org. It's the one-stop shop nationally for someone to be channeled or directed to that information that is very state and jurisdiction specific. This NASS site is different from many others, I should note, in that we do not collect any information from the user, and we send them to the exact page on the state website. So now that we've covered elections landscape overall, I'd like for my colleagues to take a couple of minutes each to discuss their state election structure and important things to know. So if he's on, I don't know, is Secretary Watson on yet?
I am.
Yeah. Okay, got it. There he is. We will start with President-elect Secretary Michael Watson of the state of Mississippi, and we'll run through each of my colleagues, and then I'll finish up with a quick rundown of Minnesota. Secretary Watson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. And thank you to all my colleagues for joining us today. And thank y'all for having us. I think what you will find is we've got an incredible group of men and women who care about free and fair elections, who care about making sure that we're doing the jobs the best that we can. The partisanship that you see nationally, I would say that's tempered and tempered down with our Secretary of State family. So you'll see a lot of friends on here who have great relationships, and we talk all the time about what's going on in elections, and I think that's important for you to know. I will tell you, Mississippi, we're a bottom-up state, as you're going to hear from many different folks about how their states run. Sometimes they're bottom-up, sometimes they're top-down. So for us, the really heavy lifting in elections comes at the local level with our circuit clerks and our elections commissioners. So for elections, one of the things that we have done here in Mississippi, I did an 82-county tour where I got to visit with all of our circuit clerks, all of our elections commissioners, to really talk about how it takes a team to run elections in our states. So we could go through the various pieces and parts of what each job does and who has control of each piece of elections, but I think it's most important really to focus on the idea of teamwork here. And that's what we do at NASS. I think it's an important piece to talk about, again, all the members that we have and the conversations we have about elections. But just like everyone else, obviously our dates are the same as each other across the states. It's important for us to know UOCAVA, the different pieces of voting that we have in our states. But what you're going to hear really is a consistent message of communication. For us, what we have is a weekly call with our circuit clerks and elections commissioners, talking about what we're hearing across the country, talking about, what are you seeing in other states? And I think that's an important piece that NASS plays in this part, where if you see something going on in Minnesota, perhaps it gives us a heads up in Mississippi or New Mexico and Rhode Island, you name it, the different states that play different roles. But I think it's really important, again, to focus on the idea that we all have a part in this. We work as team members in elections, and it's an important piece of just who we are as NASS. So, Maria, we can talk about later on if they have specific questions about Mississippi, but again, it's just in general a bottom-up state where the heavy lifting is done at the local level. We manage the statewide election management system here in Mississippi. So that's where all the voter registration data is kept. And that's really, at the end of the day, the first and only time that information hits the internet through a secure connection is at the end of the night. Election Central at each of the counties, they then enter the information through SIMS, which is the statewide election management system, as I mentioned. That's the first and only time, again, very coded and secured line of communication there. So that data is then aggregated at the state level. But we'll have usually in Mississippi, just for those who are reporting interest, we'll have about 99.8% of our ballots in on election day. Mississippi does have a 5-day window. So if you have to vote by mail and you can't get it there before Election Day and you have to vote on Election Day, as long as it's postmarked on Election Day and received within 5 business days thereafter, it will be counted, as long as it's, again, verified and it matches all of our other standards. But those are kind of the highlights with elections. I know sometimes that when reporters ask questions, they want to know about election night and how that works. Mississippi has 10 days to certify those elections. So that comes from the 82 counties, again, working hand in hand with the Secretary of State's office. But I love to just remind folks, and what we've done in Mississippi, again, is a 101 education, where we talk about elections 101, whose job is what. And I think this is one of the great options and times for us to kind of explain to you who does what. And so in Mississippi, having that really just the foresight to explain to our voters here in our state, look, if you're talking about voter registration, that's the circuit clerk's office. If you're talking about voting maintenance, voter roll maintenance, that's the elections commissioner's office. On election night, whose job is what? So when we're talking about our poll workers, when we're talking about our poll managers, when we're talking about the circuit clerk's office, who's getting that data up to the Secretary of State's office. So it's really important for all of our voters to know across the country what that process is. So when they're looking on election night, hey, where are these numbers coming from? Who's doing what? I think that's a really important piece for us to really stress to you. And in Mississippi, again, we'll have north of 99.8% of our ballots in on election night. So that's just a quick overview of kind of some things that I've heard questions from the media about our elections here in Mississippi. So I will yield my time to our next speaker.
Thanks a lot, Secretary. We'll next hear from Secretary Amore of Rhode Island. Secretary?
Thank you, Secretary Simon. And to Secretary Watson's point, the association works together to learn from one another. And there's more that is alike than different around our elections in the United States. So Rhode Island operates and administrates its elections with 3 entities: the Secretary of State's office, and we maintain the voter registration system. We get information to voters, incredibly important, as Secretary Simon said, trusted information to voters. We make sure that voters have a voter guide before them prior to the election. We print the ballots, we mail out the mail ballots, and then we hand it over to the Rhode Island Board of Elections, and the Rhode Island Board of Elections deals with the machines, the voting machines, the poll books. They oversee election day operations in the 39 cities and towns in Rhode Island, and they tabulate and certify the election. So we are separate from them in that way. And then we have 39 partners in the local cities and towns at the canvassing authorities that recruit poll workers, pick out polling locations, and do the real hard work of managing elections on election day. Now, election day in Rhode Island has already started. Our early in-person voting is underway. We have 20 days of early in-person voting. We are, I believe, setting records in that capacity. We have 31,000 voters that have already voted early in person. We anticipate about 500,000 voters for this election cycle. And we are working with our partners every day on both physical security and cybersecurity. We have a tremendous relationship with our Fusion Center, our partners on the national level, our Rhode Island National Guard here, and then the local cities and towns who are working to make sure that we are prepared for what may happen. And that's everything from a glitch with a voting machine to some physical security concerns. But I think it's important to reiterate that, almost all of us have similar duties, and elections are run very similarly around the United States. But as Secretary Simon pointed out, they are decentralized, and that's an important aspect and one of the reasons why elections are so secure.
Thank you, Secretary. We'll next hear from our colleague, Secretary Michael Adams of Kentucky.
Thank you, Secretary Simon, and good afternoon, everybody from Kentucky. So Kentucky is unique in a couple of ways. You see today a spectrum of several states that have different approaches to how to administer elections, just really based on the culture of their states. You've got Utah coming up soon, which is a primarily mail-based voting system. We're on the other end of that spectrum. Kentucky, I think maybe more than any state other than possibly Mississippi, has a culture of voting in person. Even during 2020, during the pandemic, even with no excuse absentee made available, even with no vaccine yet for coronavirus, even then, the vast majority of our voters chose to vote in person. Most Republicans do, most Democrats do. That's what folks here want to do. And so the challenge for me and for our election community is to ensure a robust array of locations and days for people to vote. We've done that. I'm feeling pretty optimistic about this election. I do expect a very, very high turnout. As of this morning, we'd already had 121,000 requests for absentee ballots. That may not sound like a lot, but we're a state that votes about 2% absentee and 98% in person. So if you control for those numbers, that would be the biggest turnout that we've ever seen in Kentucky. Second thing about us that is hopefully not terribly unique is that we too are decentralized in how we do this. There are days when maybe I'd love to have a little more control, but the truth is I like it the way it is, not just because it takes 15,000 people of goodwill to pull off a statewide election, 120 county clerks, me and my staff, a bipartisan state board of elections, but most importantly, volunteer poll workers who are paid very little and just care about our system of government, making democracy available for our citizens. These people are Democrats, they're Republicans, they're independents. They have to be by law. Every single voting location is staffed with a check and balance of D's, R's, and I's working together in good faith to pull this off. Every one of those precinct locations has a minimum of 4 people split by party ID. Those people have to agree on what the count for that precinct is for every office. And then it goes to our bipartisan county board of elections. It's the sheriff, it's the county clerk, both of whom are elected, plus 1 Democrat and 1 Republican offered by the political parties. And they also unanimously have to sign off on certification of all the totals in their county. And so it's D's and R's coming together in good faith, agreeing on facts, agreeing on numbers and the outcome. And then all of that gets submitted to me and my staff. And then we go through that information. And it's sometimes not totally correct. Every election, we find a mistake. It's always something innocent. It's a transposition error or something. 1-9 should be a 9-1 or vice versa. We've never seen an election result changed because of an error, but we do double check all of that. And then we turn over what we have to the staff of the State Board of Elections, which then has a period of time until the 25th of November to review on their own. So we have 4 levels of review in our state. And I think that's good for a couple of reasons. Number one, just having multiple levels of review is good for any process. But number two, I think it's good that voters here know that it's not Republican Michael Adams who's running everything. It's an army of volunteers. It's people of both parties. And I think it really has helped us combat misinformation and conspiracy theories, that I'm not the only person with a voice in elections. We've really leaned into our county clerks to be with us at the front line of addressing misinformation, because people in Kentucky know their county clerk. We have a small population divided by 120. And so these people are all elected. They go to church in their communities. They see constituents at the grocery. Their kids play together. That's really been helpful to us in having a local voice who's trusted. And the same goes for the poll workers. People trust the poll workers. They tend to see the same ones over and over again when they go vote. And when Billy and Pearline are working the polls just like they were last time, that engenders trust in our voters. So having said all that, I think the evergreen challenge for election officials, everything you hear about misinformation and AI and everything else, those are certainly challenges, but the biggest challenge from my perspective is just having enough locations and enough poll workers. And it was before COVID and it remains today. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. Next, we'll hear from Secretary Maggie Toulouse Oliver of New Mexico.
Thank you, President Simon, and thanks to my amazing colleagues. Thanks for all of you for being here today. Maggie Toulouse Oliver from New Mexico. And if one of these things is not like the other, I'm working from home today because we're actually dealing with some natural disasters here in New Mexico right now. Santa Fe, where I live and where my office is located, was flooded on Saturday night. My IT office was flooded, so they are working in my office at the Capitol, and I am working from home. And many of you may have heard that the town of Roswell, which is usually famous for a supposed alien visit back in the 50s, was absolutely devastated a couple of nights ago by flash floods. So we are running an election in the midst of, serious acts of nature here in my state. And as my colleagues have already said and indicated, even though we never want to see these types of things happen, and obviously they're horrific, we are working to make sure that folks still have that opportunity to cast a ballot in the midst of these challenges. As election officials, we are nothing if not flexible, and sometimes the demands of the job require that we have to be flexible and figure things out. So that's what we're doing here in my state right now. I have to just echo almost everything that my colleagues have said about the checks and balances that are built into the system. We have those here in New Mexico too, about the care that we take to ensure transparency and a free, fair, and accurate election process. A couple of things that I'll touch on that we do here in my state that most of my colleagues do as well is, and these are the questions I have been getting a lot lately, is, how do we ensure that electronic tabulators count accurately? We, of course, do logic and accuracy tests on the front end. Many of you in the media had maybe never heard that term before 2020. You're probably more educated now than even we are about this process. But of course, we test our tabulators on the front end to ensure they're counting accurately before we even put them out in the field to allow for voters to cast their ballots. They're sealed. There are chains of custody involved to ensure that they're not tampered with, and they are never attached to the internet. And then we conduct our election. My colleagues have described their canvass processes in their state. In New Mexico, we have a 3-week canvass process. We will certify the election at the state level on literally the 21st day after election day. And then we will be able to do things like ordering automatic recounts, which are mandatory by state law in certain situations. And we will also be able to conduct mandatory post-election audits of the election systems. Unfortunately, even though we are a Dominion voting system state in my state, even though Dominion was awarded a $750 million lawsuit for defamation, we still get questions whether that's understandable or not. What I would say is, look, we conduct these post-election audits to ensure that those machines are counting accurately, no matter what kind of voting machines we used in my state, whether it be Dominion systems or any other system. We will continue to do that. It is a transparent process that anybody can observe. And we invite folks. We really want to invite folks into the process. If they have questions or concerns about how your ballots are counted, and I know my colleagues in your states, you have very similar transparent post-election processes as well. As has been mentioned more than once here today, even though, I may have a lot more early voting than, say, my colleague Michael in Kentucky, or and Deirdre's primarily vote by mail state, the transparency aspect and the checks and balances aspect are almost identical in all of the states. Nothing happens during the election process where votes are being received or counted without bipartisan election officials being part of that process, without there being the ability to have election observers from the parties and from independent organizations with eyes on the process. We encourage that. We think it's important for the integrity of the election process and for folks to have trust. And so with that, I just thank you all for being here today. There's a lot more to talk about, but my colleagues have already addressed the vast majority of it. And I know Deirdre's going to have a little bit more to add. So I just want to say thank you again for being here with us today. And thanks to my colleagues.
Thank you, Secretary. Last but not least, Lieutenant Governor Henderson.
Hi, thanks you guys. Really great stuff. And as you can see, every state does things a little bit differently, but there's a lot of things we all do the same. A lot of the security measures that we have in place are very similar. Utah geographically is a fairly, good sized state. We only have 29 counties, and our county clerks run elections. They do all of the work, really. I mean, I've got a small staff that helps oversee things, but the clerks run the elections, and some of our counties are massive. I don't know how many times we could fit the state of Rhode Island in some of our counties, but it's a lot. And so we have, especially our rural counties that are really big. This is why we're a primarily by mail state. And this started for us a good 10 or 12 years ago. It started a long time ago. And the reason that we're a by mail state is because our rural counties asked for it. It was really challenging for people to be able to get to the polls. They'd have to travel for hours, maybe. It was hard to keep the security measures in place, right? Having two people picking up ballots, keeping that chain of custody. It was just a real challenge. We've got one county that's huge and only has a few thousand people in it. And so, we started kind of opting in to by mail a dozen or so years ago. And by 2020, all 29 of our counties had opted in to do by mail. So it was nothing that came as a shock to us. We already kind of had a lot of the kinks ironed out. Although now, since I've been lieutenant governor and starting in 2021, I know the kinks are never ironed out. There's always kinks somewhere, and that's just how things work. But we mailed our ballots last week. We mail a ballot not to every registered voter, but to every active registered voter. So they have to have voted in the last couple of elections. That's something that people misunderstand sometimes. So if you're not actually going to the polls and voting, you don't get a ballot mailed to you. Or if you've had a ballot returned to the clerks, you don't get one mailed to you the next time. So it's just active voters. But we are kind of an any of the above state. We want people to vote how they feel most comfortable. So I would say there are definitely a few people in Utah who claim not to like vote by mail and are doing everything they can to undermine it and to get rid of it and to try to, and they may end up being successful, who knows. But they're a very, very tiny percentage, about 97, 98% of we're just opposite of Secretary Adams. About 97 or 98% vote by mail, and then 2 or 3% vote in person. But we do require every county to have at least one in-person polling location available on election day. Also for in-person early voting, which for Utah starts tomorrow. Every county clerk is required to have at least 4 days of early in-person voting. But then, the ballots have been mailed. They can put those in the mailbox, or they can put them in a drop box. And one of the things that we did under my watch was really vastly increase the number of drop boxes. So now we require every county clerk to have at least one drop box in every city in their county, and those have to be under video surveillance. And that's a challenge for some of the smaller counties to put them under video surveillance, but they're figuring it out, making it work, and I think it's good for a lot of reasons. But we also allow same-day voter registration. So our registration ends on Friday, October 25th, but we allow voters to go in and register in person on Election Day if they're not registered. When I was in the state Senate before I was lieutenant governor, I helped run that bill, and so we've had that in place for a lot of years. They vote by provisional ballot, so the clerk actually makes sure that they're an eligible voter before their ballot is counted. But that's worked really, really well in Utah. We also allow our clerks to start processing ballots that come in early, so that on election night after the polls close, the early returns are what you see shortly after the polls close. And so that has been a really helpful thing. People are really impatient. They want to have results fast. And you can't have results fast and have results accurate. And so, we do like being able to process those early returns, and you don't tabulate them, but they're processed and ready to go after the polls close. We require our vote by mail ballots, if you're going to put them in the mail, they have to be postmarked by the day before Election Day. And this caused some problems with some people in the primary that we just had, who I don't know, they just put it in their mailbox the day before the election instead of taking it in and making sure it got postmarked. And so ours it's a postmark law, so it has to be postmarked the day before. But there are plenty of opportunities for people to vote if they don't get it postmarked the day before the election as well. So that's what we do. We've really tried hard so far in our state to take politics out of election administration. There's a lot of people trying to put it back in, but we're trying really hard to just do what works for us and what we like, and work hard with our clerks to have them open their doors and allow the public to come in and see their processes, and try to continually work to build public trust that way.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Just so we can get to Q&A more quickly, I'll be lightning fast, I hope, with the Minnesota update. And let me just say, as a parenthetical, what you're seeing here, we haven't explicitly stated, you're seeing 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans here work together. Party labels really go out the window at this stage of the election process. We're all trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to do right by our voters. And this is where we focus on where we agree, which is most of the time, rather than where we disagree on policy, which is some of the time. But right now, we're really all on the same page. Minnesota, I'll just give you the top lines. I've said for a long time that my goal in Minnesota, just speaking now as with my Secretary of State hat on, not speaking for any other state, our goal is we want high turnout and low drama. That's the mantra. High turnout, low drama. Minnesota has a good record, really good record when it comes to high turnout. So far, we have as of last Thursday, 337,000 Minnesotans have voted. That is to say that their absentee ballots, either in person or by mail, have been already accepted. So they're sort of in the bag. That is more than double the last non-COVID presidential election. So if you go back to 2016, COVID was really an outlier because there was sky-high participation in absentee voting for some pretty obvious reasons. At least in Minnesota, I know it's not that way in every state, but people weren't wild about congregating in places with a lot of other people. So that's a really good number there. We have some new laws that took effect either last year or this year, which we think are going to be good for turnout as well. Some expanded hours in counties for in-person absentee voting and the like. I will just point out that we are not a postmark state. Minnesota is you got to get it there by Election Day state. So you have to get your ballot to wherever it needs to be by the polls, the close of polls, which is 8 p.m. So whether it's hand delivering, sending by mail, carrier pigeon, you name it, you got to get it there by 8 o'clock. No exceptions. So by that night, or typically by the wee hours or maybe dawn at the latest the next morning, we should have all the votes in and therefore all the results. That's all I'm going to say about Minnesota. Maria, back to you.
Thank you, Secretary, and thank you, everyone, for all of your great breakdowns of your states. So we will begin with our reporter Q&A. As a reminder, reporters, please keep your audio muted and your cameras off to ensure a smooth recording. If you have a question, please enter into the chat. I will read the questions out loud to the members, and they will go about answering them. There will be times when the secretary chooses to answer, speaking on behalf of just their state or their opinion only, which they will hopefully indicate in their response. Please keep in mind, we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. I know from monitoring the chat that there's already quite a few in there. I will try to filter through them as best I can and summarize as needed for some of those longer ones. So let's go ahead and get started with Mr. Wang from NPR asks, does the U.S. Postal Service's extraordinary measures policy going into effect today give you more confidence that the USPS will be able to deliver this fall's election mail going forward in a timely and accurate manner? I think we should start with our president, Secretary Simon, and then perhaps maybe Lieutenant Governor Henderson as a vote by mail state. I think that might be a worthwhile thing to hear from you. So Secretary Simon?
Yeah, for sure. I want to hear from Lieutenant Governor Henderson on that. The stakes are very high in her state. I would say the answer is, in short, yes. It gives me more confidence. What we've said to the Postal Service all along, when I say we, here I'm talking about NASS in general, is we want a reliable partner. We know what they're capable of. They're capable of really good things. The 2020 COVID election is a good example. I think they really, for the most part, stepped up. And we're very pleased under very challenging circumstances with what they were able to pull off. So we know what they're capable of. We just need the Postal Service to be at the top of its game for the next 15 days. That's what we need. And to the extent that this is a reassurance that that's what they're committed to, I think that's a good thing. We've asked for things like attention to training. We've asked for things like attention to speed, obviously, because the difference of even one day can be the difference between a ballot counting and not counting, particularly in a state like Minnesota, where, as I said, you got to get it there by election day. So a one-day delay is no good. Your ballot won't be counted if it gets in on Wednesday. So to the extent that this is a reflection of the USPS taking our concerns, and not only ours, but others, seriously, I think it's a good sign, and we'll take them at their word that they're really prioritizing elections-related mail. Again, the good thing about elections, and then I'll pass it over, is, as we all know, but it bears repeating, unlike a lot of things in life, there's a beginning, middle, and end. There's a finish line here, right? And that ought to give everyone some comfort. We're not asking for them to be on high alert forever and ever. We're asking them for the next 15 days to be on the top of their game. Lieutenant Governor?
Thank you. Yeah, we did have a bit of drama over some of the mail during the primary election a couple months ago. We had our southern Utah counties, their mail started getting routed through Las Vegas in a year or so ago, and it caused some problems with them not being postmarked when a voter thought that it might be. So, we had our primary election on a Tuesday. There were voters who put their ballot in the mailbox, over the weekend, and then it got picked up on Monday and transferred somewhere, and then it sat around, and then didn't get postmarked in time according to our state law. It caused, we got sued over it from one of the candidates in the in one of the congressional districts, and our law is what our law is at this point, and you hate to see anybody's vote get tossed on a technicality like that. But at the same time, people are responsible for their own ballots ultimately. So I am grateful that the post office, I saw that document come out last month. I was grateful for it. We've been working with the post offices here in the state of Utah. They understand the urgency and the importance. Every little tiny thing that goes wrong, and things will go wrong, but every little thing just feeds that conspiracy monster, right? And it's so not helpful. And so, there's a big difference between just human error and malfeasance of some sort. And I don't believe that there was any malfeasance, but human error is also a problem. So what we've been trying to do, in addition to working with the Postal Service, is to help voters understand that they're responsible ultimately for their own ballots. And we have all these different methods that they can use to make sure that their vote gets counted and gets counted on time. And one thing that we've done since 2022, which is just, I think, really improved voter confidence, is we have a ballot tracking service. People can go to trackmyballot.utah.gov, and they can sign up and get text messages. So they'll get a text when their clerk mails their ballot to them. They'll get a text when their clerk receives their ballot. They'll get a text when their clerk counts their ballot. So people can know for sure that their vote has been counted and it hasn't just gone into some black hole.
Does anyone else have anything to add around USPS? Great. All right, we'll go to our next question. Let's do Zach from Politico for Secretary Toulouse Oliver or anyone, but we'll start with Secretary Toulouse Oliver. Is there anything different about certification this year versus 2020 and 2022? Have you all issued guidance to local boards about requirements, prepared legal filings for counties that may not file, et cetera? And as a fun fact for some of you new folks, Secretary Toulouse Oliver was our president during 2020. I'm sure she has fond memories, nothing but fond memories about that time. So, Secretary.
Thank you, Maria. No, I have nothing but PTSD. No, just kidding. Kind of. In terms of certification, I think the challenges we went through in 2022, as unfortunate as they were, our Supreme Court in my state was very clear. Certifying an election is a ministerial duty. The point of having a board to certify the canvass of the election and the results is to make sure that the county clerk and their staff did that job. That the county clerk just can't say, oh, I did it, so just trust me, right? We have an external entity verifying that process happened. Supreme Court said that is a ministerial duty. So I am hopeful that we are not going to see a repeat of that in my state, although I do, hope that it also doesn't play out this way in other states this year. I think we all want a smooth certification process. We all, as election officials, are going to have a lot of faith in our election results outcomes, and I think we're all going to urge our local certification boards to do their job. It is a ministerial duty everywhere. So knock on wood, at least in my state, hopefully that will go smoothly. What I will say we are preparing for and just, planning for the worst, but hoping for the best, ensuring that our folks that are conducting these processes are safe and secure in these processes. We have all been spending a lot more time on physical security and making sure that our election officials at all levels are more physically secure this year. And of course, when our electors meet in our states, ensuring for the physical security of that process and those individuals as well. So yes, we are thinking a lot more about this in 2024 than we did in 2020. But I think that each one of us, and I know for my state, and I think I can very confidently say for my colleagues here today, have a playbook in mind for how to handle any, unanticipated eventualities in the certification process.
Awesome. Secretary Simon, do you have anything to add as president?
Yeah, just quickly, we were concerned in Minnesota about what we saw in some other states, I won't name them, where there were certification issues at the county level, and there was no intel that this was happening in Minnesota. So we actually went to the legislature and got a law passed last year, believe it or not. One of those things you hate to have to legislate, like legislating good manners or something like that, but we actually have a law now that says in the counties, the county must certify as the winner the candidate who got the most votes. We didn't think that needed to be said, but it is now. And the reason for that is not to foreclose a challenge to an election. I'm a strong believer. We have a strong tradition in this country of dissent and people not always trusting the government, and that's okay. They don't have to trust me or any of my colleagues. The courthouse door is wide open in state court and federal court for people to challenge elections. And it should be. It needs to be. Gather your evidence and your witnesses and go to court. That's where you do it. Not by getting a county commission to sit on the results or do something else in the absence of a hearing or evidence or whatever. That was our view in Minnesota. I'm speaking only as Minnesota Secretary of State now, just what we did in Minnesota. And, I guess our philosophy is, and mine is, it's every citizen's right to challenge the election. You don't have to believe what you're told, but bring your evidence, bring your witnesses, or get a subpoena. But once the last court has issued its last ruling, we got to be done. That's it. That's where you fight things out, and not at the county commission level. So that's why we passed that law. So I hope, by definition, we're not going to have that issue. It'll always be subject to challenge by citizens, but the place to do it isn't by holding up certification at the county level. That's our view and my view, and that's the action we took in Minnesota.
Does anyone else have anything to add?
I will. So we had a couple of counties, one in particular that was just really proving to be challenging during our primary election with certifying. But one thing that we we were ready to sue them if we needed to. You hate to do that, but it was the county commission that was just, not wanting to do their job, their role. But their county attorney came to them and said, okay, the risk pool is not going to cover this. So it's the lawsuits, insurance isn't going to cover this. So we're going to have to pay for it out of our county budget if you guys cause us to get sued by the lieutenant governor. So that was a helpful little, it was helpful for a small county that, didn't want to pay for a frivolous lawsuit.
Okay, so I will go to the next question. Let's see, Christina Cassidy from AP. I will go ahead and do the second part of her question, just for brevity. On early voting, we have seen few actual problems so far. Does this bode well for November 5th, or is it too early to draw conclusions? Perhaps our Elections Committee co-chairs, Secretary Adams or Secretary Amore, would you like to hop in?
Well, I think that's good news so far, but I also worry about when those predictions are made. No, I think that to the point that has been made time and again on this call, we have been preparing for this election for over a year. And so it doesn't surprise me that there have been few issues with early voting because, and as all of the secretaries have said, the lieutenant governor has said, the folks on the ground are doing their jobs, they're doing them well. And they're responding when things are not amiss. So it does not surprise me. And there's a human element to elections. And so we will have issues, but I think we're well prepared to address those issues as well.
I'll just add, I think it's too soon to draw conclusions. It certainly is in my state. We haven't opened up early voting. We're completing the absentee process now, and we open up in-person voting shortly. But I'll add this. I think the big delta for me to try to get my head around is what's the turnout going to be. And to put this into perspective, 4 years ago, the last week of voter registration being open, we had 3,700 people register. This time in the last week, we had 12,000 people register. We typically are 2% absentee. We had 121,000 people request a ballot so far, and we're not even done yet. That's 2% of 6 million people. We only have 3.5 million registered voters in our state. So we're looking at potentially a massive, massive turnout. So for me, the big question is, how does that turnout look in terms of utilization of the days? In our last election for governor last year, we had about 20% vote early and the rest vote election day. I hope that we don't have 80% of 2 or 2.5 million people voting on the last day. That's really going to strain, number one, our poll workers, number two, tempers. So what we're working really hard on right now, and I'm doing paid media out of my office budget, is to persuade people to go vote early and to skip the lines, to get in, get out, and help us manage the throughput. Because 2 million voters over 4 days evenly is pretty easy, and 2 million voters mostly on the last day gets a lot harder.
Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add? Awesome. Okay, we'll do our next question from CNN. Pivoting off of Secretary Adams' remarks, does anyone else want to weigh in on recruiting poll workers and the role they play? Has getting enough volunteers at every voting site been an issue? I think perhaps maybe Secretary Watson, President-elect, would you like to tackle this?
Sure. One of the things we've done in Mississippi is really a bunch of outreach, talking to our business leaders across the state. And I tell them every time, if you want good, fair government, you got to have good, fair elections. Good, fair elections, you got to have great poll workers. So what are you doing to encourage your younger generation of leaders coming up in your businesses to engage in their civic duty, to work the polls? And so we've been in schools, we've been in, you name it, we've been there talking to people about working the polls. And our poll worker portal that we launched back in 2020. We were visiting a county, Yalabusha, I believe it was, just prior to the election back in 2020. And clerk said, look, we're okay. And remember, COVID was on our faces then. And so a lot of folks, the more wise generation, did not want to work the polls because they were concerned. And he said, look, if a couple folks get sick, we're going to run short. And we were able to go back to our office and send him about 38 names that we had in our portal. So it's getting creative, and it's listening to ideas from secretaries like that are right here in front of us. What are you doing in your states? And how do we do this together to get that outreach? So Mississippi's good right now. Again, we continue to work on getting younger faces into polls. And to one of the comments that was made earlier, and I think a couple of folks have made it, and Michael had even names with his. When you see these poll workers that continue to return, it does really encourage folks and gives folks that kind of comfort level of, they know what they're doing. I've seen them here year after year after year. I think that's important. And again, when we start seeing this number start to thin out, and we've got to get younger people, younger faces, as they get engaged and they see how easy it is and how important it is to work the polls, I think, again, that just goes to the point of making sure that people are confident in our elections. And that's an important piece. So that's what we're doing in Mississippi. I'm sure some others have some thoughts as well, but a very important role that they play.
Does anyone else want to hop in? Well, we are rolling through these questions, so let's go ahead and go to one from Miles Parks at NPR. A number of states have recently voiced frustration with the Biden administration and DHS for not doing enough to help them with finding non-citizens on their rolls. Do any of you share those frustrations? And relatedly, what do you make of the claim that some statewide officials have furthered lately that the Biden administration wants non-citizens to vote in this year's race? Do we have any takers? Secretary Toulouse Oliver, I see you smiling.
Well, I may have a different point of view from some of my colleagues here today, and of course that's okay. But I will say for my state, New Mexico being a border state, and I've been, this is my 5th presidential election that I've either overseen or run at the county level when I was a county election official. This is something that gets brought up every single presidential election. And it is something that we have pursued through various means in our state over the last couple of decades to try to suss out whether or not there is truth to the notion that, maybe not an individual here or an individual there, but that a big number of non-citizens have made it onto our voter rolls and or have been voting. And every time there has been a research project, either in 2006 by our then Republican U.S. Attorney, in 2011 by our then Republican Secretary of State, we've never found the problem that is being suggested. So, of course, I want to just say that we have to be ever vigilant. Non-citizens should be aware and are made aware that they are not eligible to vote in federal elections. We do everything we can to prevent them from getting on the voting rolls. And of course, we don't want them voting. And in my state, as I'm sure in my colleague states, it's a felony for a non-citizen to either try to get on the voting rolls and or cast a ballot. And we have a zero tolerance policy. If you are committing any kind of election fraud or interference, and you're violating that election code and committing that 4th degree felony, in my opinion, you're going to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. So that's the view from the border state of New Mexico. And of course, if my other colleagues have different points of view, by all means, that's just one person's opinion.
Does anyone else want to chime in?
By the way, really quick, Maria, when Maggie said earlier, one of these things looked differently, I thought she was about to make fun of me because I'm on the road. So sorry about the wallpaper behind me. But
I guess 2 of us look differently, Michael.
I pulled off of the highway to jump in here to do this call. So I apologize. I will say, and look, we don't always agree on everything. I have tremendous amount of respect for the folks on this call. Some really, really good people. My bigger concern right now would probably be that the way that the census is used and how that's going to impact, the number of seats per state. That's one of the issues I think we've got to think through. If you look at what does that look like in the future, and is there a chance that maybe there would be some kind of solution that allows these individuals to vote in our elections? It's troublesome. I will say, to Maggie's point, every one of us, as far as I'm concerned, again on this call, do a really good job of making sure that our voter rolls are clean as they can be. Now, that also brings a human element to it. In Mississippi, that's our elections commissioners' jobs. I can't force them to do their jobs. I don't have the authority to fire them or to make them do their jobs. They're elected just like I am. So I think with each state, it brings a little bit of a different approach and whether or not folks are actually doing that job. So that's one thing that we always have to look at. But again, I think you look at it from different perspectives and you know, what is the end game? I don't know, but we always keep our head on a swivel in elections offices, just like everyone on this phone call. So that would be my input.
Does anyone else have anything they want to weigh in with on this? Okay. We're going to keep the good times rolling and do 2 more questions. And Christina Cassidy at AP had another one kind of in line with this a little bit. Over the last few days, we've seen a resurgence in voting-related conspiracy theories that we've been talking about for like the last 4 years or so. Machines flipping votes, more people registered than eligible numbers of, than eligible, large numbers of non-citizens voting, just mis and disinformation. But were you able to deal with this? Secretary Benson in Michigan, Maricopa County Recorder Richter are calling out Elon Musk on his platform X. Is any of this efficient? It's long. Is any of this effective? There are fewer guardrails now than the social media companies 4 years ago. How concerned are you with election information environment is beyond control at this point, and anything you can do to counter the fire hose of misinfo?
I'll say,
Go ahead.
that's the question of the day, right? That we all are dealing with that. How do we, truth is boring, facts are boring, and outrage is really interesting. And what was it that Mark Twain said that a lie will get halfway around the world before the truth can put its pants on. So it's like playing whack-a-mole with truth. But what we try to do is just get as much information out there as possible, and from various sources too. So we have really partnered with kind of trusted community voices, along with our clerks, but other kind of trusted public officials and whatnot to get information out there, good information, even just boring information, but trying to flood as much as possible. We can't compete with Elon Musk, but also it's really hard to remember that Twitter's not real life, although it does have some serious consequences when that sort of mis and disinformation trickles out. It affects all of us, and it affects all of us in a very bad way, and it affects our free government. So it really frustrates me personally.
Secretary Simon, would you like to hop in? I know we've had our Trusted Info 2024 initiative. Yeah. That would be awesome to talk about.
Yeah, real quickly, I know others want to be heard too. The Trusted Info, that's really the point of all this, is people are getting pinged with a lot of information from a lot of sources. And our humble ask is that before people swallow whole what they see in their social media feeds, they at least verify it against a trusted source. We'd like to think, all of us on this call, that we are those trusted sources, or our offices are. If not our offices, then maybe a county, then maybe a city, someone who actually does this work so that they can compare, and maybe they'll be less susceptible to some of the conspiracy theories. And when we're talking about disinformation too, at least the way I think of it, it's the spread of knowingly false information about what the system is, not what it ought to be. What it ought to be is always up for debate, 24/7, 365. If someone wants to say the Minnesota election system is this or that, or the Secretary of State's a criminal or whatever, that's not disinformation. That's a disagreement. But the system is certain things. And when you mischaracterize them, those things, to misdirect people and mislead people, that's a problem. It's up to all of us in our individual states to set the record straight about what our rules are. So I don't pretend to do that for Kentucky or Utah or anyone else. But the trusted sources and trusted information, the things that we're pushing as a national organization, are really, really important. That people seek out that information, don't just swallow whole what comes across your feed.
Anyone else have anything you want to add?
A couple things, Maria. I will say sometimes you've also got to add the human error piece. We actually had an instance a week or so ago in one of our northern counties where some folks were complaining that the machine was switching their vote. And in all actuality, they were actually mashing just below where the person's name was. So they were the ones that were mashing in the wrong space on the machine. So sometimes we got to make sure that we're understanding the information on each specific case. That may not always be the case. Maybe you've got a machine that got bounced out of the truck and it's messed up, or maybe you got a machine that's actually accurate and somebody did mash the wrong button, but they say and they didn't. So I think we got a case by case there. Don't paint with a broad brush with these things. That's very dangerous when it comes to elections. I'll also tell you one of the things that I've had family members, I've had folks all over the state reach out and say, "Hey, I saw so and so on Facebook said this." Well, it wasn't true. So I do appreciate folks are starting to ask more questions about, wait a minute, I saw this. Can you verify that? So I'm really thankful for that. We've done a really good job of getting that information out, especially through NASS. Our Trusted Information campaign has been effective in my mind in Mississippi. Folks all over the state are asking questions of us. So I'm very thankful for that. And then lastly, look, the First Amendment's a beautiful thing. Sometimes people are going to say things that may or may not be true, may or not be false, whatever. I think it's up to us as elected officials to play a role that is that trusted information, but also just as citizens, like Secretary Simon said, do your research. Just because somebody says it doesn't absolutely mean it's true, but it might be. So if you take the time to go bounce that information off a trusted source like your elected officials, but also do some research on other things, making sure that you've got the full picture before you make that decision. Again, I've seen it in Mississippi. People were sharing this article on Facebook and it just wasn't true. And by the statute, by the law, it was very clearly not true. So again, we've got to do our research. We can't just sit back and say, oh, well, that, so-and-so said it, so it's got to be true. Well, that's very, very dangerous territory.
Definitely. All right, our last question. So we have it from Jeff Selden at Voice of America. Federal officials have raised concerns about what happens in the 24 to 48 hours after the polls close. Can you all talk about what your states are doing to prepare for that, to keep calm and reassure voters that the tallies for the different races will be /are accurate? Let's go ahead and start with Secretary Simon and then anyone else that would like to hop in.
I'll just hone in on one particular thing. Just because results are added after election night does not mean that is a, quote, dump of votes. Okay, you're going to hear that in some circles, perhaps. We did last time. There are a variety of reasons you heard it on this call. There are states that are postmark states. By definition, ballots are going to come in after election day. Or there are states that maybe aren't, but they can't start tallying absentee ballots until the close of polls on election night. Of course, they're going to be counting into the next day or two. I just want to prepare people for that specific thing. Just because ballots are added after election night, it's not a dump. It's nothing wrong. That's explainable by individual states' laws. That's all I'll say.
And to that point, Steve, pretty much all of our states, we put out numbers on a regular basis. Who's voted in person, who's applied for an absentee ballot, how many have been returned. So you can do the basic math. Right. And you can tell for yourself that ballots are not being added to the totals that aren't within the realm of reality based on what has been sent out. And the reality of election administration and the reality of humans is that sometimes voters wait until the last possible second to return their ballot. It's just the way of the world, and they'll hand it in on election day. They'll put it in that ballot box. They'll put it in the mail as of that postmark deadline. But you can do math. You'll know how many ballots your state mailed out, and as long as the number is equal to or less than what was mailed out, that is a number you can trust.
I want to ride that really quickly as well. And one of the things that Maggie mentioned earlier, the logic and accuracy testing, just to kind of go back, that's public in Mississippi. If you want to go see them test these machines, and you're seeing a lot of heads shake yes, this is a public space. And for individuals in Mississippi, we have a resolution board. They can start working on these absentee votes at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. on election day, and that's public. You want to come watch them do it? Come watch them do it. When the returns come in, you want to be at the courthouse to watch them announce them and watch them do what they do? That's public. They can watch them. So I encourage the public, don't just sit back and say, well, let me see what the rumor mill says. Go play a role. Go be a part of the process. Go watch it happen. So then you can tell your friends, that didn't happen. I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. So I think that's an important piece to remember, that all of our voters need to understand this is a public process. You want to go watch the machines being tested? Go watch them. You want to go watch these absentee ballots being opened? Go watch them. You want to watch the process for the resolution board? Go watch it. Don't just take, for granted that ability to go play that role of being, hey, I'm going to hold my election officials accountable because I'm going to go to watch it. I think that's really important to remind folks.
And I know you all are also talking about how election night results are unofficial and that, it takes time to certify and ensure that these results are accurate and things of that nature. So you all do a really great job of that. And I think that's something the national media definitely needs to come more to the secretaries and talk through that process as well. Does anyone have anything before we close? I think that's all the questions we have today that we'll have time for. Any closing thoughts or anything of that nature? Awesome.
I just want to say, I personally just want to thank the media. You guys have done an incredible job of working with us over the last several years to really understand the election process and get deep into the very unsexy aspects of the election process to help explain to the folks. So I think I speak for all of us today. I'm not trying to, but I think I do when I say thank you.
Yes, thank you guys, and thank you for attending today. So that's all the time we have. If you have any additional questions or would like to connect with the individual secretaries' offices individually, you can contact me. I will put my email in the chat if you don't already have it. And we really do appreciate everyone participating today. This recording will be up in about 48 hours or so. And well, have a great rest of your day. Thank y'all.
Everyone.